Hi, Warwick. Thanks for agreeing to have a chat to us this afternoon. You're joining us as the coordinator of the Hunter Jobs Alliance. So maybe if we start off with you telling us a little bit about what is the Hunter Jobs Alliance?
So the Hunter Jobs Alliance is an organisation comprised of 13 affiliates. So we have 9 unions and 4 community environment groups, so all locally based in the Hunter region. Our union affiliates, we have AMWU, ETU, United Workers, Nurses and Midwives, a number of others. And then our environment groups, we have the Peak Environment Body in New South Wales, the local environment centre in the Hunter Valley, Lock the Gate Hunter Renewal, and also Labor Environment Activists Network as well. So quite diverse. How it came about was a recognition between worker and community environment interests that there was a lot more that united them than divided them. And that was in part a recognition that, like a lot of other places in Australia where there are challenging issues around resources and energy, the conversation had gone a little bit sideways, and trying to identify where that common ground was, where the shared interests were, and in particular, the shared interests around the future of the region. How do we maintain ongoing jobs, economic opportunity, prosperity, and have a place that we all like living in? And so that became really the imperative. And as some of the worker organisations and the community environment organisations started engaging with each other and talking, they found a really high level of common ground on some of those aspirations, and particularly on wanting to have a better and more constructive conversation than we've had. And so that rolled on to the formalisation of an alliance, and a set of priorities which we're just starting to roll into now, about how we would like and hope the conversation to be progressed in our part of the world.
Okay, so it's more of a community-led sort of process around engaging people around a vision and how you'd like to see some of the challenges around changes in the energy sector be managed. Is that a fair kind of summary?
That's right. As far as how we see our role and how we go about our work, so I'd say there's 2 primary things that we're focused on. So one is, it's really challenging in any kind of environment, but particularly a regional environment where you're trying to grapple with really big, complex challenges. So the issues we're talking about, in our region, we have power generation, we have heavy industry that's reliant on power generation, smelting, and other operations. We also have large numbers of coal mines and the world's largest thermal coal export port. So big, complicated issues that involve economics, trade, structural adjustment, labour markets, environmental issues, local political conflict, the whole 9 yards. So it's a really difficult environment when you're trying to deal with fundamentally challenging issues around changing economies and ensuring people's livelihoods and opportunities are maintained. What we have seen is that it's really difficult to even start thinking and talking about tackling the policy or the actions when there is not the clearly articulated community pressure asking for those things to be done, whether that's from government or whether that's from business or whoever it might be. And the other side of that as well, it's partially about the community articulating its concerns and what it would like to see done. It's also about providing a bit of permission to decision makers to be able to say, I am going to be responding to what the community wants, and I'm not going to get punched around too much by going and choosing this particular policy or talking about this particular issue or taking this action. So it's very much about creating a set of expectations and a set of priorities that are coming from a worker and community perspective in a region, and then also providing the space to get those done. So that's more about the local situation. Where it starts to roll into the more practical issues of how you go about dealing with these big structural changes in economies. As everybody knows, these things are really, really challenging. We tend to get caught a little bit, I think, in the politics, but the reality is the practical side of it is just as difficult, if not more so. In the Hunter region, like a lot of other regions, we've had some experience of dealing with structural change. The closure of BHP more than or about 20 years ago now is probably the best known example, but we've got some familiarity with it. But does that mean we have the local institutional knowledge, the local tools, the local policies and plans, the knowledge to be able to respond to those things? No, it's not like you get these things off the shelf. And so we also see our job as having something serious and credible to say about what a policy response looks like in detail for this part of the world. And we see part of our function there is to show that the community has something meaningful to say on this and that we are able to lead the conversation. And it's not all about pressure and expectation. It's also about saying we are willing to walk the walk and at least be a constructive part of the conversation about where we think it needs to go, whether that's about firmed renewables for running heavy industry like aluminium smelters, whether that's about investment attraction or fixing our training system in New South Wales so that it works at a regional level, whether it's about public investment, whether it's about things like structural change authorities and plans. We want to have something meaningful to say, and that's our job as far as being able to illustrate what it might look like.
Cool. So what are the advantages? I mean, because I guess what people are talking about in Central Queensland is, ways forward around coordination. There could be something that's much more formalised, like something like Latrobe Valley Authority. It could be more council-led, so something similar to the Hunter Joint Organisation, which you've got in your region as well. What's the advantage of more of the model that you're working with? Like, what does that enable?
Yeah, so look, I would say from the outset, the model for us as essentially an advocacy organisation seeking to represent worker and community views that haven't been as prominent as in the conversation as we would have hoped, is that we're there to advocate. I will make some comments about those type of models that you've mentioned as far as what we think is what would be needed in our part of the world. But our approach is not the solution in terms of this is how structural change is going to be managed and invested in and actually done in practice. But we see our role as being able to point to the need, point to the community concern for this to happen, and also to be a participant in working out what those solutions are, and being a constructive participant in that. And part of that is for us to say, we think this is the type of model that's required. And there's lots of variations that can be done on this, but I think the lessons that we've learnt from both our past history in the Hunter region, we've had equivalents of things like the LVA in the 80s dealing with large restructures at BHP. We had a Hunter Development Board, for example. We've got some of that institutional knowledge there. Got models like BHP Pathways programs. We've also looked at WA, Victoria, and so on. And in our view, it needs to be heavily led by local people and have a lot of local input. It needs to have the capacity to demonstrate that someone is in charge of what's a real issue. It's not just about nice to have diversification. It's not just about supporting workers who may be impacted by a specific retrenchment. It's about saying this region is taking these issues of structural economic change seriously enough that we are bringing a group of stakeholders together, bringing a group of local leaders together who are going to have permission and authority and a mandate to be able to do that, whatever that looks like. The other couple of aspects we think are crucial. These things don't happen without substantial amounts of public investment. That also helps attract that private sector investment as well. We know that responding to structural change is a hard thing to do, and that costs money. And I think the other side of it is you need to create whatever the mechanism is. It needs to be durable over time. It needs to be better than political cycles. And I know there is different ways to do that, but trying to deal with issues that occur over decades and over the period of half a person's working life, for argument's sake, is not something that you can do in the sort of 18-month, 2-year window between when an election wraps up and then the next one starts. And so you really need that. And there is, there's issues around bipartisanship and so on that are helpful on that front. But at the very least, you need to be able to lock in a model that says this community wants this for the long term. It's going to be funded for the long term, and we're going to plan over the long term to deliver those kind of evidence-based activities. So that's a conclusion we've come to. The way it gets cut up in different regions really depends on the circumstances and who leads and who the stakeholders are. But in terms of it being collaborative, strongly supported and listening to local people, being well funded and having a clear plan that's durable, that's evidence-based, I think those principles are probably essential for any region looking at these type of issues.
Great. So what would you say would be sort of the limitations of what you're doing? What is it, I guess, some of the constraints on the particular model that you're working within?
Yeah, look, I'd say there's a couple of constraints. So these are difficult issues. They're contentious issues. The Hunter region is not a small place. We have more people and a bigger economy than Tasmania. And so there's going to be a lot of different views in there, and trying to firstly encourage a conversation about the reality of structural change. Not everyone's going to be bought into that. Not everyone is even going to believe that it's happening. Not everyone is going to believe that it's a problem. Not everyone is going to believe that there's anything we can do about it. Not everyone is going to trust that government or a business will be able to deal with it or do the right thing. And so you have this big spread of opinions, and trying to talk about what are inherently complex issues doesn't always cut through. And so there's inherent challenges about. Our view is that step one is having a better quality of conversation about these issues that is not people yelling at each other in a polarized way. We see that as a distraction from whatever people view the main issue is. For us, it's about responding to structural change in the interests of the region, and also looking at some of those sustainability issues. But whatever the focus for a particular organisation is, having sort of prominent national figures rocking up in your community and yelling at each other about the resource sector is really pretty unhelpful. And so our challenge is trying to trying to trust in the better nature and the capable nature, and the fact that people in our region are fundamentally decent, who are all interested in the future of the region. And that's the story that we need to encourage, but that doesn't always work and doesn't always cut through politics. So you've got to stick at it over time. And for an organisation that's fairly new, that's a journey that we're on. I think the other challenge or the other shortcoming is that as a model, it's not the whole solution. You need to be able to engage collaboratively. For us, we're worker and community environment organisations, obviously need to engage with the business community, obviously need to engage with local government, obviously need to engage with state and federal government as needs, and pulling that all together from an advocacy point of view takes time, and there's lots of steps to go through. So I'd say the other drawback, if you're comparing it directly with something like an LVA or the Collie Just Transition Working Group, or even the 2050 Foundation that some of our colleagues in local government are looking at in the Hunter region, we're a means to an end. We're not the end. And so that's probably the other shortcoming when you're looking at models. But in terms of us being a absolutely essential, necessary step to encouraging that conversation and showing what the pathway is and showing how it's practical and tangible and real. Absolutely, we feel like what we're doing is really quite critical.
Great. Okay, well, that's really great. Any last words of advice as people in Central Queensland are grappling with this?
Oh, look, I think being very, very aware about the diversity of values and opinions in your community, and trying to, not stand on the landmines. You're trying to walk the walk on creating a more constructive pathway, dealing with really difficult issues that take a fair while. And so you're not always going to get it right. There's always going to be the prospects of people who, are put offside or take things the wrong way, or people who might exploit things politically or whatever it might be. But at the same time, you need to make best efforts to bring everybody along. And that means being aware of where they're coming from, what their values are, what really matters to them, and what they're trying to achieve. At the end of the day, you don't get anywhere by yelling at people or trying to tell them what they should be doing. You need to be listening to them. And I think being aware of that and being aware that process takes time and care is really important. That's probably the main the main bit of advice that we give, such as it is coming from one place. Every place is different, obviously, so people will make up their own minds about what matters in their part of the world.
Great. Thanks for your time, Warwick, and I look forward to seeing you in a week and a half.
No worries. Absolute pleasure. Really look forward to it.